Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Active Color webinar series. Today, we're thrilled to have Andrew Kavanaugh back again hosting Exploring the Camera Raw Filter in Photoshop. Welcome, Andrew.
How you doing, Ollie?
Doing good. How about yourself?
Good, very good.
So, Andrew, we'll take questions throughout. Everyone in chat, feel free to send them over in the questions or in the Q&A section or chat. And Andrew, I'll let you take it away.
Great. And should I introduce myself?
Absolutely.
Great. Okay. So yes, I'm a digital artist, and I'm a Photoshop and Lightroom tutor, instructor, as well as I do photo editing, photo compositing, retouching, which I've done a lot for different advertising in New York and in San Francisco before I moved to Los Angeles. I'm also an Adobe community expert and an Adobe Express ambassador, as well as run various groups on Facebook. So you might have even seen the post about this in my Photoshop and Lightroom group, which has about 361,000, I think, members by now. And I also run an AI art and digital art group for that side of things, that kind of creative side of things. Okay, so today focusing on the Camera Raw filter in Photoshop. And so as you can see here, I have a various DNG and RAW files. These are files that I asked for from some friends and admins in my groups, series from George James at the bottom here. Thank you, George. And a couple portraits from my friend John Williams here. So I wanted to kind of show the type of challenges that you tend to have with images that you tend to solve with the Camera Raw filter. So the way I like to work is I'll have a series of images like this, and then I just click on one of the images and I will drag it down to my dock to my Adobe Photoshop 2023, which then automatically launches the Camera Raw filter. I can also show you where you can get that from the menus in Photoshop, but this is a very kind of direct way that I like to work. So, okay. So if you look in the top right, you'll see that there is a histogram. You also see that there's like a blue shadow clipping warning and then a red highlight clipping warning. So if those are on and you clip, yeah, see if with the blue one, it's not really clipping the shadows, but when I turn on the red, that was before, this is after, you'll then see in this general area that there's kind of like what looks like red paint showing you that those are clipped highlights. I tend to not be overly concerned with that. I just do a quick preview with that. But just to let you know, with that histogram, as you're hovering over, let me zoom in a little bit, as you go across this different kind of histogram map, you'll see that it changes the name of where you are. So highlights, exposure, shadows, and then blacks. So it's showing you the content, how much content there is. So a lot of the content is in the shadows and the blacks and more minimal in the highlights and the whites. And one thing to know about that histogram, besides just it giving you a visual, you could technically click on any spot in that histogram. And as you click, you could move the histogram and it will change your image. I don't really want to work that way, but you can do that to do like a quick adjustment on your image. Okay, so the way I like to work is, I go through this basic panel, and the first thing you'll see is there is like a white balance eyedropper. And so if I felt that this image had like a color cast, I would choose that white balance eyedropper, click on a neutral gray, and then kind of fix any color cast. I'm more concerned about how dark it is right now. So I'm going to go through the kind of exposure and highlights shadow options. So with an image like this, and I might want to bring the image down a little bit more. I don't really need this little thumbnail here. So I'm going to bring this down just by pulling down. So I have more kind of screen real estate focused on the image itself. I will go to exposure on the right. And as you can see with the slider itself, what I've always appreciated with Adobe for Camera Raw in Photoshop as well as Lightroom Classic, these sliders themselves tell you which way you would go for what result. So if you look at exposure, if you go left, you would be going darker or, minus. And if you go to the right, it would be brighter, adding plus to your exposure. So I just simply click on the slider, I move it to the right, and it does hit pretty hard. So I try not to go too far, too fast. So 0.55 right now. And I do just a little bit of that, maybe a little bit more to kind of let it breathe a little bit. Then I'll pull the contrast to the right to like 12 to 14 range. If I go down to this icon, it says toggle the default settings. That's just a quick way that you can see the before and after. So it's a nice way to kind of quickly see how far you have come with your image. And so I will then go highlights negative. So I'm bringing back some information to the highlights that might have been blown out. Shadows, I can see in the darker areas that there might be some detail that's missing. So I will go to the shadows, go to the right, open that up a little bit. And then I like to have another way to accentuate the contrast. So I'll go to the whites and move that to the right a little bit. So that gives a kind of nice punch to it, brightens up the brights. And then I still might feel, especially if I go and do a before and after preview, it's still a little bit on the dark side. So I might move the exposure to the right just a little bit more, the 80. And then at this point, if I feel like the whole image is a bit too warm, a bit too yellow, I do click on that white balance eyedropper, and I'm looking for kind of like a neutral gray. So click there, and that really kind of makes it cool. So I do a Command Z and then look for another kind of neutral gray that's a bit more subtle, maybe up here. It's about the same, but brings it back. It's sort of that yellow color cast. And then I can see the image much better so that I can go back and then tweak the exposure a little bit more. Once again, the whites a little bit more, and maybe I'll bring the blacks back down negative to add to that contrast. So before, very yellow, dark image. Now it's kind of breathing. You can see the true colors of her shirt and the red of her smock, I think that is, as well as the oranges on the left side. So that's going through kind of the, exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, blacks, which is like your basic adjustments. And then you get down to an area that you have your texture, clarity, and dehaze. So texture is a way that really works well when you have an image that has a lot of detail, say like trees, rocks, things like that. I tend to be a little shy about it when it's a general image like this. If I go and move the texture slider, it will give a kind of sharpened look to it. It's a bit subtle, but you might see it in certain highlighted areas. Or I will just double click the tab to go back to 0. And then my opinion about clarity is I feel like it's a bit too strong. So when I move clarity, if you go way up, you get a very grunge look. So if you're looking for that, it might be valid for that. But I think that the clarity kind of hits a bit hard, so I don't tend to use that. And then dehaze would be if you had like a photo of like a foggy sky, and the image just feels kind of muted a bit. Then the dehaze, when you move that, it would bring back some density to it. And in an image like this, which I think is a good photo, the dehaze will just kind of darken it up. And then once again, as I said, if you go to any extreme, so if I go all the way to the right or all the way to the left, if you just double click on the tab, it goes back to 0 to your defaults. So it's just a quick way to get back. So with an image like this, my attitude towards saturation is I pretty much stay away from the saturation slider. I feel that even going a little bit already, it's very kind of orangey or reddish neon in her arm at just plus 19. So I tend to stay away from saturation, and I much more favor Vibrance. So with Vibrance, what that does is that will add saturation to the muted colors. So the areas that are lacking saturation. So that I can just pull a little to the right, and that adds some nice color to the blues and some of the reds without oversaturating and clogging it up with color. So once again, I can click on the toggle at the bottom right to see the before and after. So it's pretty good. And then with an image like this, I'm a fan of going to the detail panel. And then for sharpening, I might bring it up to like 57 to 60 range, but you can't really see what's being affected. So one thing that I really like about the detail panel is the masking slider. If you hold down the Option key on a Mac, Alt on a PC, you click on the tab, and as you move it, start moving it to the right, you'll see it's pure white. So the pure white means that everything is being sharpened. As I keep holding the Option key or Alt on a PC, and I move the slider, you'll get this preview. And the further you go, it's showing you whatever is white is being sharpened and whatever is black is protected. So it's reading your image, and it sees that the areas of her cloth that are smooth and her skin, which should not be sharpened, are protected. And where there's a lot of details, such as her hair and areas around the oven and details in the back, those will be sharpened. So in this case, I take it to like a 48 level, and that will kind of sharpen the areas I want. If I take it even further, it even hones in on just the detailed areas. Maybe at 60 might even be better. And then I just let go, and then that's sharpened. I guess I could zoom in a little bit. And then if I do, the only thing is if you do that toggle, you get everything. So it's hard to see what might have been sharpened if you had that yellow color cast. I just zoom out a little bit. And then any questions, Ollie, at this point?
No, Andrew, no questions as of yet.
Okay, great. And then as you can see in the detail area, there's also noise reduction. So if you click there, if I did see noise in this image, I could just move the luminance or color sliders to fix those areas. So in this case, when I like it, if I just say done, it will, as the hover states, it will apply changes and dismiss the dialog. If I hit open, then it will open it into Photoshop itself, where I can then do like any direct retouching or other effects to it. Now, if I go back, so I'll just say save. Okay, and I'm just going to save. So for me, it defaults to Photoshop when I go to save, which is fine. And save. And then I'm just going back to that original thing. Now, one thing I did want to show you, though, is if I just kind of bring that back real quick, if I bring that image back in, and I'm here with that image, if I were to hold down the Option key on a Mac, Alt on a PC, when I hover over the Open key, or button, I should say, when I hover over Open, it switches to, say, Open Copy. So Open switches to, it's hard to zoom in and show at the same time, but it switches to Open Copy. So then when I do that, it just creates another copy of it. So I'll just don't need to save that. So I'm just going back to the other areas. So that was just a general kind of color casted image, and an image that was too dark. And then if I have an image like this, where it has dark areas, and so, you know, underexposed, overexposed areas, and I can just drag that to Photoshop, launches into Camera Raw. And then when I go to the basic panel, I have the options of fixing both of those areas. So the first thing is, you know, if I'm going to work on a sky like this that is underexposed, if you go to the masking area, as it says here, edit any part of your image using a variety of tools. Once I click on that, it tells me the new changes that I've made, and I just say try on my own. And then all these pop-ups of all the different changes. You'll see that here it says subject, sky, or background. So with a simple click, once I hit sky, it now has that selected. So it does a nice masking of the sky. And then the minute I go to exposure, that kind of red preview goes away, and I'm just into the edit itself. So in this case, in this DNG, as I pull the exposure to the left, it's bringing back some good density to the clouds. And then, of course, I can go to my highlights and then move that negative. So I'm bringing that down to bring more density as well.
Andrew, one question came in.
Sure.
Dale is asking, when applying that noise reduction, how do you know which slider to use?
Okay, so yeah, even though I'm in light, let me jump down. Let's see if I can get to. I'm still in the mask, but yeah. Let me just open as normal. Just going to hit done, and then I'm just going to go back to this one. So if I'm just in this regular image, and I go to detail, so you have to kind of understand what they're suggesting. So with manual noise reduction, you have two options. You have luminance and color. So luminance would be luminosity or light. And so that would be any kind of noise that is created by light that you see on the edges of images. And then color would be more like if you had like a red or bluish kind of pixelization around the image. So one is light and one is color. Does that answer the question?
Yeah,
Ollie?
and then one more question from Judy. I think it's in the other image you're working on, but
okay, good.
She's asking, is there a way to select portions of the sky that are separated by clotheslines so you can adjust them all together?
Right, so let me just go to that image. So yeah, so I'll bring this back in. Okay, so it still kept the, okay, so the question was about clotheslines? Ollie?
Yeah. So she's asking, is there any way to select portions of the sky that are separated by clotheslines so you can adjust them all together?
Right, so see if I can go back to the, back. See if it's hidden behind it. So as you can see here in my masking panel, it says mask one, this is sky one. And as I hover, you can see the kind of red preview of what is selected. Now, if I were to click on show overlay and have that overlay as a constant, then you see that there's also the add and subtract. So if I click on subtract and I then choose a brush, this is a very large brush. I hit the left bracket to make it smaller. It's set to subtract. And then when I go in and I paint, it would be erasing from that selection. So that is how, if you had like clotheslines or some other features, like, you know, there's also this flag here. If I didn't want that to be selected, I could go in and I could paint over the flag to erase that from the mask selection for the sky. And then just be aware that, like I said, you would press the left, forgot the name of it, but the key next to the P to reduce the size of your brush so it is more sized for something that's that. And then what I just did now that makes it easier is when you have like something that's very vertical like that, instead of trying to follow it down with your brush, all I did was click at the top. I held the shift key and then clicked at the bottom. So that's a quick way to kind of get a vertical line. And in general, like when it comes to masking, like for the sky, it is wise to preview your image. So you see before and then after. You might notice that when you zoom in, that there's a whole bunch of areas at the top of this, looks like a museum, at the top of this museum, where you can go in and erase because it's already selecting that. I don't think it'll be affected too much when you change the sky exposure and highlights. But if you want to be very exact, you have the time to do that. I would go in and clean that up. So just remember that's in the mask panel. Here's your sky. And then the minute you click on subtract, you get a variety of options. So the option I chose was the brush, and then it's set to subtract. So I can just go in and paint in the different areas wherever I see that red preview to clean it up from the sky. Because it did bleed into the this building itself. And so if I want it to be nice and clean, I just go back in and paint that out. Okay. Did that answer the question? Hope that helps.
Yeah, and then Charles is asking, why does the sky mask include parts of the building? You're on point.
Why does it kind of bleed into the building?
Sure.
Yeah. I think what it is if I hover over here, trying to get the preview, turn it on, turn it off. Even though the sky does look very, very bright and overexposed, I guess it is reading that there are certain parts of the building that have a similar tonal range. So it will select those areas when you are just trying to select the sky. It's not a perfect science, and I think that they are always working on it, especially with all these AI or Adobe Sensei tools. So in time it'll get better. But the thing is, it's pretty amazing for like a one click. So like 2 seconds, it gets the sky. And if it means that you have to go in by clicking subtract, choosing a brush, and then hitting the left bracket to make it slightly smaller, and then go back in and then just clean up certain areas, it really isn't that much work. I think it's a nice way that it works, and you can do pretty good with that. Any other questions in terms of masking, or should I go into the other image?
No, but thanks, Andrew.
Yep. Okay. So yeah, just hit done, goes away. So I'll go back to here. Doing pretty good. So yeah, it's a photo by George James, of George James and his son, sweet son. Good photo. So this one is a bit, overexposed in the sky and in the front. So this might be a good example where I would go to the masking and then once again click sky. And then, yes, it bleeds a little bit into George, into the subject. So I can hit subtract, choose brush, and then right bracket, make it a little bit bigger, and then go in and subtract from there. It's not affecting them so much. There we go. And it gets a little stubborn sometimes. You have to kind of paint over it a little bit. But I did a pretty good job for most of it. And so when I'm in the sky, I can then just go once again and then bring the exposure down. So in this case, the original sky pretty blown out. Then I go negative exposure and it brings it back nicely. And then highlights, bring that down. And then in this case, I'm going to go down to, maybe I'll add a little color. Let's see. Fine tune. So I'm adding a little blue and then upping the saturation. So kind of more beautiful blue sky. And then if I go to masking, I can say select people. So it's finding people in the photo. I found both. So that's pretty cool. So it finds, you can find both. And then if I hold shift, selects both. And then as you can see here, one thing that's pretty amazing is it says entire person, but the masking capabilities have gotten so good now that you could technically just choose aspects. So you could say facial skin, body skin, eyebrows, the whites of the eye or the sclera, the iris and the pupil, the lips, teeth, hair. So you can go to right through all these different options. But in this case, I just want the entire person. And then I go back to my sliders, go back to basic. It seems like it's getting the whole image though, which it doesn't really bother me, but it's just kind of should have been more isolated. So select people. Okay, so yeah, I've select both of them and then I hit create. And then once you say create, then you're in the mask and then you can go to your panel, your basics panel, and then change the light, the color, etc. So in this case, the minute I go to exposure, I can make them a little bit lighter or darker. I can add some contrast. Go back to highlights a little bit. Open up the shadows if I wanted a little bit more detail on the highlights of his sweatshirt. So open up the shadows a little bit. Maybe bump the whites. So if I go here, that's how bright it was in the beginning. And then here is now. So the sky is more realistic, nice blue, and they have a nice contrast to them. And then I might just bump up a little saturation on them. And then you can see you also have other options. So you can go to curves if you want to do a tonal range. And then you can also add sharpness. So since they are the focus, I'll go down to sharpness, maybe move that to like 42. And then I don't see the option though for masking so much though when you're in this preview. So maybe they don't give you the masking option when I'm in the mask. They won't let you mask if you're already in a mask. Okay. But yeah, detail, sharpness, yeah. Okay, cool. So there's that. Any questions related to this? So masking and tonal correction of people.
No other questions. Yeah.
No other questions? Yeah. Okay.
Not at this time, Andrew.
Okay, great. I'll just say done. Go back to my series of photos. Okay. So here's another one where I want to kind of bring out the color as well. So yeah, so I can go to masking once again, and I could say subject, and then I can just click on add, and I could just say brush, and I can get a large brush. I want to select this whole area in front. So you can either let it do it for you, or you can go in and manually paint. And then I always paint with the masking with a large brush. And then as I get closer to the edges, I hit the left bracket to go to a smaller brush, and then just kind of paint around the edges. And then another thing to know is you do see in the masking panel, there's add and subtract. But a quick way that I like to work is when I'm painting around the edges like this, if I want to make sure that it's clean in the sky area, I just hit the option key, and that goes to the minus symbol in the brush. And I hit the left bracket to make it smaller. So holding down the option on a Mac, Alt on a PC, I can then go in and then just kind of paint around those edges to make sure it's nice and clean and it's not bleeding over into the sky. All right, so now the Forefront is selected. And if I wanted to, I could get very particular and left bracket, making the brush a little smaller, and then go in and select a little bit of the, what looks like palm tree on the right. Not sure if that's that important, but it's selected now. So then as I go down, I see that for the light, I can go to exposure. So I can bump that up nicely. A little bit of contrast. And then highlights, I tend to like to pull the highlights back so there's not blown out. Maybe a little bit more contrast. And then shadows, if I open them up a little bit, you'll see a little bit more detail in the trees and bushes. And whites to the right for bright highlights, but I don't want to blow it out, so I'm just being careful. And then saturation, started set to like a blue. And then I go down to detail, and I'm going to do the sharpness. So once again, I move the sharpness to the right. And I wish they had the masking option in detail and do that. So it's before, that's after. Pretty nice. I'm just seeing what other options I might want to tweak while I'm here. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. And then once again, I can go to the masking icon in the right. I right click and I choose select sky. Now the sky is automatically selected. So I can bring the exposure down on that, show that it's more of an evening shot. The contrast, move the highlights down, make it more dense. And let's see, if I go back to the mask one, just to let you know that you can also fine tune the tonal corrections by going down to curves. So if I go here, I can just kind of click in a point and I can add a little contrast. So pulling up the midtones, a little bit of the highlights, and then down for the darks, but I don't want to make the darks too dark. So I just brought out some of the highlights in the shadows and the blacks. And then I hit done. Okay. Any questions?
No questions. Just want to get a chance to answer a lot of comments. Some of the viewers are talking shop.
Did you want to read some of the comments out? Or?
Sure, yeah. Just some feedback on some of your techniques, some of their techniques. John says, looks great, awesome tips.
Cool.
Tom did ask a question. He said, couldn't you have just selected the sky, then inverse the selection?
Yeah, but I wanted to show the different ways of doing it. So, you know, there might be a time where I didn't even want to select the sky. So I wanted to show like a quick way of selecting the main subject area, where if I don't click on it just to select it all as one, it's so easy to just brush it in. So yeah, there's always alternative ways of doing everything, of course. It's just I wanted to show another alternative way. So okay, so now I want to show some portrait retouching. So photo by John Williams. As I drag it to Photoshop, it opens up in Camera Raw. And so yeah, it's a bit dark. So I'm going to just go in and open the exposure a bit, the contrast, pull the highlights down. Still a bit dark in the shadows, so I'm going to open up the shadows and maybe the blacks a little bit. Yeah, so that makes it breathe. The blacks really help there. And once again, you can see the before and after the bottom right. So that's pretty good. And then I zoom in a bit. And then just to be honest or transparent, when it comes to the Camera Raw filter, in terms of retouching, I tend to use it just sparingly. So I will do it for a little bit of touch-ups, but if I'm going to do like a real portrait retouch, I will do that in Photoshop, where I can have, multiple layers or empty layers where I go in and do areas like underneath the eye, retouching of the hair, etc. So where camera raw filter works well for retouching is, I go over to the healing brush over here. And as I click that, you have simple size slider. So as you move that, you can see it gets larger or smaller. Once again, I like to use the bracket keys. So I just do like the left bracket. And I'm looking for a brush that's just a little bit larger than the area that I want to fix. I choose show overlay. It might give me a preview, but I'm just going to start originally. So I just go over. Yeah, so this is content aware remove. So you might notice that is new in the latest versions of Photoshop. So content aware remove, that's a little bit different. So that would be like if I wanted to get rid of the little bit of facial hair or slight beard underneath his lip, and I were to select that, the way it's supposed to kind of excel. It's a little mushy though, but it's supposed to do a good job at getting rid of things. So in this case, maybe this might be a more appropriate area. So a little stray hair on his eyebrow. So just click and pull. Yeah, and that blends in nicely. So that's where it's, content aware remove is better for getting rid of certain things. And maybe like some of the stray hairs around his head up here on the right and this top left. And it's still blending a little bit. Yeah, that's pretty good. So where I want to remove it itself, I'll do that. But where I want to blend it, that's where I will choose healing. And so once again, yes, you can use the slider for size, or you can do the left or right brackets. So left bracket to make it smaller, and I'm going over to here. Now, if I click and I pull over, one of his forehead lines, it gets rid of it and blends it in with the background. And that's why I like healing for retouching, whereas the content aware remove is for removing. Now, if I were to pull the opacity down, just to let you know, bring that down to, well, maybe I'll make it even lower. So maybe like a 15. If I then go and I click over another forehead wrinkle line, you'll see that it's very minimal. And then if I then increase it to like a 45 and do that same area again, it's kind of medium blended. So opacity is like the strength gauge for your healing brush. And therefore it's the same when you go to your clone tool. So clone, you can treat clone tool almost like a mixture of both the content aware remove and the healing brush. Whereas if I have clone set to 100% opacity and I go in and I option click and then I just drag over, it doesn't do the best job. See, so that's why I was saying that I'm not the biggest fan of the retouching when you get into more advanced retouching with camera raw filter. But I think it's really good for like the spot healing and some of the content aware remove. So as an example, if I go over to clone here and I want to get rid of this hair itself, it creates a very kind of hard edge. Now I could go to the feather slider and bring that up to like 30, 29, 30, but I still feel that it might look kind of, still hard edged and kind of mushy. So when it comes to skin, I tend to just use the healing brush and just go over the little wrinkles. Right. And just remember the opacity is like your strength gauge. So if you want it to be in between, you can make it like a 50, 45, 50. And then I can get rid of the little areas where I blend them in with the skin. Yep. So it's good for a little cleanup, a little spotting, as they would say. And so that's the way I would use it for certain images. And then of course, if I hit open, it takes me into Photoshop where I can even just do a quick Command J, new layer. And then as I zoom in, Command plus, I then have all of these tools from which to choose from. So if I go to like the healing area, you have spot healing, then the remove tool, healing brush tool, patch tool, and then of course the clone tool underneath. So with this, I have more control where I can do the left bracket. And then with the spot healing brush, I just click and drag. Yeah, and it almost even feels a bit more kind of natural when I'm in Photoshop itself. And then I even see like some of the mistakes that it made. So I'll go back to bring back the skin texture and get rid of some of the blurred out areas. And I have it in its own layer, so I can turn on the layer on and off to see the preview. And, there's maybe a bigger challenge here where a little bit of marking on his nose. You always obviously have to ask, that is a charismatic look, so he might want that. But if he did want that removed, you could then choose like the patch tool, where you can choose a bigger selection and then selected. And then as I pull up, it's supposed to select a similar area and blend. And when I click, it's not too bad. It's a little bulbous in areas which I can darken, but it did get rid of that kind of skin area. And then I could obviously go back hitting the J key. I can go back to spot healing and kind of blend in some of those areas so it doesn't look so kind of retouched. Any questions about retouching?
No, but we did miss one from the previous image.
Okay.
Judy had a question about brushwork. She asked, any trick to getting the uneven edges of the mountain without slow work with a small brush, or is that the only way to select edges of the mountain?
Okay, I'll save this. It's saving, and then after that's saved, I'll jump back to the other image. There we go. Okay. So go back here. Okay. Just bring this down. Okay, so for the mask. Right, so this is the preview of the sky. And, and right there is what the one of the attendees did say, that if you had selected the sky, you could just go to the right and choose invert. So yeah, there is that, but I wanted to show some more options that we have. So in this case, you have the sky, and then as I hover, it gives me the preview. And if I feel that there was an overlap, that's where you can choose add or subtract. So if I go to subtract, there is the option of, selecting sky again with the hopes that that might do a better selection. But I think that the most control you will have is if you choose brush and then hit the left bracket to make a smaller brush to go around those edges. Because if you use linear gradient, that's like bringing a linear gradient down into the sky and not for like edges. And radial would be creating a radial, like a circular thing. So as you can see here, though, you can choose by choosing color range if the sky was like one color. In this case, the sky is bluish gray with this orange kind of like sunset color. So by the fact that it has a range of colors from the orange to the bluish gray sky, I don't think color range would do so well. So, yep, hope that helps. Any other questions?
None at the time.
Any general questions about the camera raw filter? Oh, so one thing I wanted to show, a thing that I really like about the camera raw. So let me just hit done, go back to this image. So I'm back to this image, and say, well, say open. And then say I created a new layer and I wanted to do a variation on this. So if I go back to, and this is where you also get it too. I wanted to show that. If you're in Photoshop already and you go to filter, and you click filter, this is where you will get camera raw filter. And so when I choose that, it takes me back into that same sub panel for camera raw. And then beyond the basic panel, like I said, there's curves if you want to do more curves adjustments. Detail is for sharpening. But now if we get down to color mixer, that's where you can go into particular colors. So the one thing I really love about Photoshop in general and the camera raw filter is this target adjustment tool. So when you have the target adjustment tool, if I wanted to focus on a particular color, I click on that. And then when I bring my cursor over, instead of it looking like a regular cursor, it has a preview of wherever I go on the image. So it's showing me a preview of the color. Now, if I go here where this yellow I think might be too bright, when I click on it, it's showing me, since I'm in the hue slider, that I could technically change it to more of a green. And if you look over in the panel on the right, the yellows move to green as I move it to the right. And if I remove it to the left, it would become more kind of yellowish orange. In this case, I'm more interested in saturation. So I would just click on saturation. So it's hue, saturation, or luminance. So I'm choosing saturation. And as I hover over the yellow and I click, as I go to the right, I can make like a brighter yellow. Or if I go to left, I can pull down the intensity of the yellow. So the target adjustment tool, it focuses on particular parts of color. Do be aware though, that if I go to that yellow and I go like this, it will affect other areas of the image, such as her hair. So you have to watch. It's not creating like the best auto mask. So you have to watch that when you click on it and you pull, that you're not taking out too much color in another area that has similar aspects of yellow. I'm a fan of that. And then if you want to do something creative, we can go down to the color grading panel. And the first thing is you have the different breakdowns. So you have your shadows, your midtones, and your highlights. And then if you go to the right, you have global. So if you wanted to give a color for a sense of mood over the whole image, when you click on global, you then just have this color wheel. And then you could say, well, maybe I want more of a bluish haze to it. Now, the thing is, when you first click, you'll see, let me expand this. So if you don't see much information, there is a triangle on the right. You just click to expand. You'll then see the exact number of where you are in the hue slider. And then, of course, when you go to the left, it's telling you that the saturation is 100%. And then there's two ways of dialing that down. You can either just click on that circle, and as you pull inwards, so if I go all the way inwards, you're like back to 0 saturation. And as I go back left, 42, 53, there's certain percentage. So you might want just a touch of it. So I might bring it down to like 25 or 20. And then, as I said, it kind of, as you move that point, it also moves the saturation slider. So you could technically just, of course, just move the saturation slider itself. So that's global. And I tend to like to be more focused. So with an image like this, I might say, well, for the highlights, maybe I'll add even a little bit more yellow or orange. And just by clicking here, it's kind of more subtle. Of course, if I go to 100% saturation in the highlights for the yellows, it might be a little too dense in this area. So I just bring it back to around 44, 42, maybe 42%. So it gives a little touch of that. And then for the shadows, maybe I want to add a little bit blue to that. So when you do that, it adds blue to the shadows. And then, of course, once again, it defaults to, when you click at that point, 100%. I just have to pull inwards to kind of dial it down. So it just has a little bit of a touch of that color. Now, so if I hit OK, you'll see that the original, kind of zoom in a bit more. The original is got that kind of warm yellowish tone. And then when I click this one on, it has more of a cooler bluish, it has yellows and highlights, but it has a nice kind of bluish tone in the mid and shadow range. And then if I were to do another copy of that layer, and I just go up to my adjustments and I convert it to black and white. So here I am in Photoshop, and I'm just converting to black and white with an image adjustment layer. It reads the color of the image. So it's reading all these different colors, even though it's a black and white. So if I, once again, choose this target adjustment tool, I can go into my image and I can say, okay, well, let's lighten the skin. So I click here, and as I pull, it moves the reds, which lightens that area. And I could click on the area behind and pull to the left and kind of add some contrast or darks. And then maybe I want to open it up. So you can jump around the area to add a little bit more contrast to your black and white conversion. And then just for the sake of showing you the color grading feature in Camera Raw, what I might do, I've already created an extra layer. I will choose to select that layer underneath, just do a Command E that says black and white. And I'm just going to double click, just say color grading. So right now it's just another layer that's been converted to black and white. And I might even say, okay, well, that's good, but I even want a little bit more contrast. So I might quickly open up my curves, do a little bit of a mid-tone and highlight curve. Yeah, so it breathes a little bit better, has a little bit more contrast. That's its own standalone layer. And then I can go up to filter. Now, this is what I wanted to also show you by being in Photoshop. When you go up to filter, you have the Camera Raw filter here, but you'll notice that you also have it at the top. If you were to choose the one at the top, it would just apply the last settings you used when you were in the Camera Raw filter. So in general, whenever you are working on an image and you want to go in fresh and you want to be able to make your own manual adjustments, you should always make sure you go filter and then down here to the mid area to Camera Raw filter. Otherwise, if you chose the top, you'd be applying the last settings used, which might not make any sense with the type of image you are working on. So Camera Raw filter opens up in Camera Raw. And like I said, in this case, it defaults to color grading, which is what I worked on last. Now I have two options. Once again, I could go to global. And then in this case, when I choose like a blue, it gives this kind of monotone look, as if I almost did like the hue sat panel and did colorize. So it gives it like a colorized look. So I can give it any particular color I choose on this wheel. And then of course, its strongest strength is at the edge, but if I bring it in, you get less and less. So this is back to 0. And this is, say 52, that's like 81. So that's that, but I don't want global, but I just wanted to show it. What I do want is like a duotone effect. So in this case, I might say, she was very warm image, but what would it look like if it was a very cool image with blues and purples? So I might make the highlights. So I choose highlights. This pops up. And just to let you know, also there's this icon. So I click there, you can have a smaller view of midtones, shadows, and highlights. But I tend to like to isolate. So I'll go to the highlights, click there, and I'm in the bigger color wheel. And it just feels more exact when I'm doing it. Okay, so highlights, like I said, I want to be a little blue, but it's obviously too strong. So I just click and pull inwards, and I get a little bit of a touch of that blue at around 42, maybe 40%. And then for the darks, I might want like more of a kind of bluish purple, or maybe a darker blue purple. Yeah. And that's at 100%. And as I pull that back, you're going to get that. If the effect is not that strong, you have a question, Ollie?
Yes. Bob would like to know, when would you make adjustments using the optics tab?
And the optics. Oh, okay. So optics is like for like distortion to your image. So if your image had a distortion to it, by moving this, you can see that you can you can either make it very surreal, or you can fix any kind of jutting in or jutting out that's happening to your image. And then if you go to the vignette option, you'll once again notice that there's a triangle on the right. So anytime you see a triangle when you go to an area, make sure to click that so you can see what options you might have. So if I go vignette and I go to the left, it's adding a dark vignette around the edges to the image. And then if I move it to the right, it's adding a light vignette to the image. I tend to lean towards adding a dark vignette to isolate the focus. So in this case, I might add a dark vignette, in this case, -86. And then just be aware that you have a midpoint. So if I move the midpoint, to the left, it's very dark. If I move it to the right, you're lightening it up. I don't really touch the midpoint too much. I might move it just a little bit to the left to accentuate the darks even more. But, if I turn that off, you'll see that that's the image before where it's very bright. And now it has a nice vignette. So that's a good call. So thanks, Bob, for that. That's a nice way to add a little touch to the image. But yeah, optics is for fixing distortion or adding a vignette. So if I go back to color grading, like I said, with this image, I might have added this effect, and maybe I don't feel that the duotone's strong enough. So I might want to go to the midtones as well. And so for the midtones, I might even add like a kind of greenish. Once again, it always starts a little strong, but that's good just so you know that it took the correct color that you want. And then I just dial it back by pulling it inwards. So now it has kind of like a bluish, slightly green duotone look that I like. So there's a kind of a cooler effect to it. And so when I go back, I say, okay, then that was the regular image. And then that's the kind of duotone effect. Any questions?
One question Michael's asking in general. What are your thoughts on other raw editing programs? Have you tried any?
I think it was that On One has a good raw editor. And it's pretty much the same processing engine, but with Camera Raw and Camera Raw Filter, Lightroom Classic has the same processing engine. So I might use Lightroom Classic, which most likely, if they are interested, I will do a Lightroom Classic webinar for BenQ. But I've seen, different ones that pop up. I've run the Photoshop and Lightroom group, and there's a lot of people that say, I use this particular raw editor. I think a lot of them are probably fine. And it's the same thing, like when you have a function for, like, say, Photoshop to resize an image. I've also heard people talk about different resize plugins or, apps. And I think those are fine too. The main thing is, check the reviews of that people are giving for them and see if there's like a star rating type of thing. Or once again, to give a shout out to my group, you can always, come to my Photoshop and Lightroom group and ask, what do you can make a post. What do you think of this raw editor? And then people will chime in. And so people with experience who might have been using it for years might say, love that. It's really good for this or that. And other people might say, wasn't that impressed. So I do think in general that groups are a great way to get feedback. Sometimes you get sarcastic people saying, you could just have Googled that. But the idea of a group is to really be helpful. And I think you can get some really good industry acknowledged experience. So you can get people who have had experience in the industry and use certain tools, certain programs, certain plugins, and get their feedback rather than doing a generic Google search and getting a basic answer. So Facebook groups, woohoo! Any other questions, comments?
Yeah, one from Judy. She asked, did you say in the beginning that you can fix clipped colors? I only heard about it to fix black and white.
Yeah, I don't have any examples of that, but let me just jump in just to show. So if I go back to camera raw, this isn't, like I said, this is also a dew tone, not the best. Maybe you go to the other layer. So let me just go to this one. Filter camera raw. So I know that we were talking about the noise reduction. So under detail, there's noise reduction. So if you had general kind of luminosity noise, you would use that slider. And then there's color noise. And then the minute I open this up, if you were to start moving the color noise reduction, you can also tweak the detail and the smoothness. Main thing though is most of the DNGs that I work with or that people give me as well usually don't really have a lot of noise. It's very well lit and the photo is solid. So I'm just wondering if there's other. Yeah, those are just general calibration options. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah. Barry's asking, what about DxO?
DxO
Mhm.
as the raw adjustment program. I've heard
Right.
good things about it. I mean, once again, I would say though, when you have a particular question about an app like that, feel free to join my Photoshop and Lightroom group and ask that question there, because you might get like literally 20 people saying, yes, been working with it, working with that app for years. It really excels this way, not so good that way, which I think is much better than just doing like a regular Google search. Great. Okay. So I think that's about an hour.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, a few more, a lot of
Sure.
comments here. But real quick, I'm going to launch the poll to see if attendees are interested in a Lightroom webinar. So I just launched that one. Let me know.
Can I vote as well?
I'll count you on there.
Yes, please.
And then Andrew,
And
will you share your Lightroom and Photoshop Facebook groups with the chat?
yeah. And then just to clarify too, for me, it's Lightroom Classic. I'm a big fan of Lightroom Classic, which is like the desktop version. Okay, so let's see. Let me close the poll.
Okay.
Looks like 92%. That's pretty good.
Yeah, 23 out of 25 people would like to see it.
Okay. So let me okay. You see my screen now?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay. So that's just Facebook right there. And so let's close that. So here is my Photoshop and Lightroom group. So move this over here. 361,400 members. And it's a great group to share your work. So it, like I said, it's anything from asking questions on when you're doing an edit or general photography questions. In general, here's someone saying, starting a Photoshop YouTube channel, what sort of things would you like to learn? Which something I've also posted similar. Just people showcasing their style of photography, sport photography, landscape photography, portrait photography, showing before and after retouching. But it's a mix. So it's a mix of kind of creative work, landscape, portrait, sport photography, and then asking technical questions. So do a search for Photoshop and Lightroom on Facebook, or you could go to facebook.com/groups, Photoshop Lightroom group. And I'm not quite sure if the people watching today are that interested in AI art and digital art, but I also have an AI art and digital art group where people are doing a lot of crazy stuff with this new AI. So Leonardo, Adobe Firefly, Midjourney, doing a lot of AI work. And then there's artists who will mix AI elements with Photoshop and create digital art. And there's a big focus on AI now, but you might also get, as you go through the group, you might find some people who are doing purely digital art where it might be a painting in Photoshop. That's getting a little bit harder to find, but there's quite a range of styles. I know that some people, especially the ones from the Photoshop and Lightroom group, some people really don't like AI art, but I run both types of groups. So Photoshop and Lightroom for Photoshop, Lightroom, and photography, and the AI art and digital art group if you also enjoy that. Okay. Is that good, Ali?
Yeah. Yeah, just a lot of comments here.
Okay.
John Williams calls you the Bob Ross of Photoshop, minus the happy little trees in here.
Yeah,
And
I
then,
mean, you're saying? Yeah.
yeah, and then James Gordon Patterson said, after culling, I run my photos through DxO and Pure Raw 3.
Right. Yeah, there's some great additional things that you can run things through. I know that you can set up the plugins so that you also have them connected to your, say, Lightroom Classic. So you could do all your tonal correction, color correction, and then send it through that at the end. Okay.
But yeah, Andrew, that's all the questions. Looks like people are sending. Bob says thank you. Very informative presentation. John says
Great.
thanks again. James says thanks.
Great. Yep. Yeah. So anytime you see me presenting for BenQ, feel free to ask questions. And I'm a big fan of BenQ. I have the BenQ PD2725U, great monitor, and it comes calibrated from the get-go, and I think for months it's been solid and with the calibration. And there's recommended calibration tools that Art talks about too on the BenQ channel. But yeah, BenQ monitors are excellent. Thanks.
Appreciate it, Andrew. And we love having you host. Look forward to maybe a future topic on Lightroom Classic.
Excellent.
And then, yeah, to everyone in the chat, we will send the recording out tomorrow. So if you missed the first half at the beginning, you'll see it tomorrow. Big thanks to you, Andrew. Hopefully, I'll see you in person at Adobe Max in October.
Excellent.
But yeah, if we have time, I'd love to squeeze in one more webinar by the end of the year.
Yeah, either this year or the beginning of next year for sure. So,
Yeah, hopefully.
great.
All righty, everyone. Well, thank you for attending. We hope you enjoyed it. Thank you again, Andrew from BenQ, and have a great night, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.